I'm just going to ask folks who are on the call today, if you'd like, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your pronouns, your organization, and what you're hoping to take away from today. And I'll make sure to include that in the chat as well. And so we just want to welcome as many folks here as possible. And with that, I will kick it over to Tanya Brown. Welcome, Tanya, and thank you again for joining us today.
It is always my pleasure. Thank you very much for the quick introduction and the rundown of things. Let me pull up my screen and start sharing. All right, there we go. Welcome everybody to today's training, which is attachments and appendices, trying to figure out which ones you should include and what's the best way to include them so that you're getting the most bang for your buck, so to speak. I want to thank Pivotal for hosting today's training. This workshop is hosted by Pivotal, as Robert has already introduced, and we do want to quickly acknowledge the generous support of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, who is helping to put on these trainings, as well as put out a number of resources that are available to hopefully help you and your organization, agency, or otherwise entity take advantage of some of these recovery funds that are out there. We have mentioned in some past trainings that there are recovery funds that have already started to trickle out, and they're starting to come out even more in the next 3 to 6 months. We'll see probably most of the opportunities. So hopefully these workshops are a way to help you sort of get the bite-sized information to be able to start preparing for, or in fact, responding to a grant opportunity that might be out there. My name is Tanya Brown. I am a resource development officer with the Grant Plant. I have been writing grants not for the entirety of this time, but over the course of about 20 years. I have also worn a couple other hats, but my primary role and my primary career in my adult life has been as a grant writer, a resource development officer, and otherwise working for nonprofits as a direct support personnel. I work for the Grant Plant, which was founded in 2003. We are a corporation that is 13, soon to be 14 staff large. We do a tremendous number of grant applications, grant reports, other types of funding proposals and other opportunities, award nominations, etc. The most recent annual report that we have, and we're just about to release our 2020, is from 2019, and that was $26.5 million that was earned just in that year alone. I know that over the course of time from 2003 up until today, we are at $180 million that has been earned by the hardworking staff. So Robert has already mentioned these. There have been a number of other presentations that have already taken place, but don't freak out, don't worry. You can search Pivotal New Mexico on YouTube and you will be able to find these trainings. Each one is recorded and you'll be able to go back and watch through them. There's one on navigatinggrants.gov, which is the primary federal grants portal. We have one called Alphabet Soup, which kind of takes you through all the various acronyms and really the registries that you need to get started in order to do federal grant applications and federal funding opportunities. One was on preparing a case statement, and the last one we had was what funders really want, and it was a grant reviewer's perspective. Upcoming, as Robert has already mentioned, we have the grant project mapping workshop. The one in late December is, should we apply for this grant, a way to sort of measure and weigh if it's worth it for you to put your resources into applying for a particular opportunity. And then the two we have coming up in January are where to find data and how to prospect for grants. Where do we find these grants in the first place? So this class and upcoming classes, as I mentioned before, and as Robert mentioned, are recorded and will go on YouTube. So let's talk about the objectives of the workshop today. The first is to just plain and simple, familiarize yourself with the most commonly requested forms, attachments, appendices, etc., the documents that you're likely to be asked to attach to a grant application. The second objective is to learn how to prepare your attachments for electronic or hard copy submission. Most grants these days are electronic, but I will tell you this year I have already worked on 2 applications that we could only submit a hard copy. It was not available to do an electronic submission. So still important for us to talk about that. And the third objective is to learn some tips on how to make your attachments and other crucial bits of information that you kind of have to include and often sort of just get stuck together and thrown at the back of your application. How do we make those stand out? And how do we take opportunity and advantage of really sort of highlighting some of the really important information that kind of gets bogged down in some of the numbers and the text and the lots and lots of data overwhelming the person who is reviewing the application. So let's talk about that first objective to begin with. Don't worry about writing down every single one of these grant attachments. Remember that this will be up on YouTube, so you can certainly go back and reference it at that time. But I just wanted to point out that, as was mentioned in the last email promoting this class, 40% of grant reviewers will visit your attachments first. And I can tell you, as somebody who has done grant reviewing a number of times, this is pretty true. Oftentimes, the first thing we go for is your budget, but sometimes we will go for other attachments, and I will talk about those as we get to them. So I'm going to break down the commonly requested attachments into 3 categories. There's the legal structure, there's organizational information, and then there's financial information. So in terms of your legal structure, what you will find is that these types of documents that are listed here are the most commonly requested, and it's fairly exhaustive. I can't think of many other legal structure attachments that you are usually asked for in a grant application. The ones that are highlighted in red are the ones that I find that either every time you're going to be asked for this, or most of the time you're going to be asked for it. The other ones that are in black are just ones that, you know, you could be asked for. So if you want to sort of get them ready in case somebody does ask for them, you're just one step ahead of the game. The first and most obvious one is your IRS 501c3 letter of determination or other document which establishes your legal status. If you're a government agency or a tribal nation or whatever, you will need that letter that establishes your eligibility. There are things like the IRS Publication 78, which basically just is the way of the IRS on the internet of verifying that you are a nonprofit organization, or your deductibility code status. The state of New Mexico's Office of Attorney General's office does have the charitable organization registration statement, aka sometimes called the evidence of good standing, and I'll show you what a copy of that looks like. And there's sometimes they'll ask for your license or corporate reports, or they'll ask for your bylaws, which are usually what was included, certainly initially when you filed for 501c3 if you are a nonprofit organization, and you may have updated in the meantime. Other things that funders might ask for are things like a conflict of interest policy, an anti-discrimination policy, and or, if these are 2 separate documents, which they could be, a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, as well as certificate of liability and or event insurance. That's sometimes when you're applying for a specific program in which you need to demonstrate that you've covered your liabilities. So in terms of the IRS 501c3 letter, this is a sample of what it should look like. Up here at the top, you will see employer identification number. You'll also see effective date of exemption right around here, and it will have your nonprofit organization's name and address. The recommendation is that you have one of these letters that is dated no longer than 5 years ago, but I have to tell you, many times I have turned these in and they're 20 years old, and I've never had a funder say, well, I need a more recent one. It's just not usually an issue, but the rule of thumb in the industry is that they should be less than 5 years old. This is the New Mexico Charitable Organization Registration Statement, as I mentioned. This is just a sample of what it would look like. You can go online in order to get this. I think I don't know if I have the link for you. If I don't, ask me at the end of the chat and I'll try to cut and paste it for you where you can get it. It's free to get the statement. And then here's an example of some nonprofit bylaws. They usually look like, you know, here's the general, what our organization is called, what is the mission, who's in charge, what is the structure, the power, what offices are held, etc. So now we're going to talk about the commonly requested attachments and appendices that have to do with your organization or sometimes your specific program. First is the list of board of directors. You will be asked for that almost every single time. Very frequently, you will be asked for lists and or biographies of your key staff or your executive leadership. And also very frequently, you'll be asked for an organizational chart. Now on this screen, and the next couple of screens, sometimes next to them, you will see an asterisk next to the listing of the attachment or appendix, excuse me. The asterisk is to indicate that in most instances, this is something that you can consider how you're going to format it and the way in which you're going to present it. So, for example, number 8, your strategic plan. that is usually written either by a third-party contractor or your board or somebody, and it's already been formatted. It's got a specific thing. It's thrown into a PDF. You've been handed it as the person that is going to be writing the grant. There's not usually a lot of changing, customizing, or formatting you can do to your strategic plan, for example, but you sure can change the way in which you list your board of directors or your staff, or even the way you present your mission statement. I did highlight mission statement in red because it's usually not an attachment at the end of your application. You're usually asked for it within the context of the narrative, but occasionally I have seen, and this is more of a throwback to funders that tend to do things the way it used to be done. Sometimes they will actually say, we want a one-sheet page that shows us your mission or your mission and vision statement. Sometimes you'll be asked for an organizational fact sheet. Sometimes you'll be asked to list the board meeting dates and where the minutes are held, and if the minutes are available to the public. They may also want to know past dates as well as future dates. And I do want to mention, in terms of your list of your board of directors and your staff, because the way that funding is going these days, it is increasingly being asked, and it's a good idea to consider including things like your gender breakdown, racial breakdown, any other key characteristics that you think will help show the diversity that is reflected within your board and or your staff. Those are good things to consider including in those lists, even if you don't list them individually. And I'll show you an example of that in a little bit. Other things that are often asked for or good to consider including are things like your annual report. Sometimes you'll have to just include the most recent one. I've had applications that ask for the last 3 annual reports. Newsletters or blog posts or e-newsletters or e-blasts, that is much more rarely asked for, but occasionally you'll see it. Any kind of articles, reviews, features, or any other publications about your organization could be helpful. And I do want to note that at the top of the screen, you see, if they're not requested, you should consider including these if relevant. I don't want you to feel like you have to, or really that you should, include every single one of these attachments. Certain funders, the way they ask their questions or the things that they already ask for on the side, they may say, do you have anything else you want to show? And you go, oh, you know what? I think this actually is going to be relevant. So don't feel like you have to include every single one of these attachments. However, if you want to be a fully prepared grant writer and somebody ready to hit the ground running as soon as a proposal or an opportunity presents itself, it would be really great if you had all of these documents, or at least all these relevant documents to your organization, ready as PDFs, Word and or Excel spreadsheets, depending, in a separate folder so that you could just kind of grab and go. So client success stories, sometimes those are asked for within the context of the narrative, but sometimes they are asked for as a separate thing. I also highly recommend putting pictures with client stories if the client feels comfortable with that and gives you the release. Sometimes you'll be asked for things like organizational and or program case statements with target client demographics, service statistics or organizational statistics, either organization or program. Oftentimes you will be asked for at least a program logic model and sometimes an organizational logic model or theory of change if you are asking for general operating funds. And then if you have a specific evaluation tool or continuous improvement tools, things like surveys that you give to your clients at the end of their participation in your program or services so that they can give you feedback, and then you review this and say, okay, this is what we need to do to adjust our program. Sometimes it's relevant, important, or really a cool way to feature a way in which you are constantly striving to provide the best programs, services, and opportunities for the clients that you serve. Volunteer statistics are often overlooked, but could be a crucial part of it, especially if your organization heavily relies on volunteers. Sometimes there's an organization that might have advocates, which is nearly entirely who does most of the work for the organization. It's important not only to log how many volunteers you have and maybe some demographic data about the volunteers that serve, but how many hours they put in. And it is important sometimes in the context of a conversation about budgeting that there is an in-kind value to what these volunteers are, the services they are performing for you. Almost always, if there is a partnership or collaboration, you will have to include a memoranda of understanding with the community partners and or letters of support from the broad community about why your program and your organization is so important to invest the funders' dollars in. Sometimes you'll have client intake forms and program questionnaires, and then occasionally, if applicable to your organization, program curriculum would be a relevant and an important thing to include. Again, that's very much contextually based on what kind of programs and services that your organization does. So this is supposed to be blurry, but if you take a look at this page, it is basically the standard of what you expect or what you commonly see when you get an attachment of a board of directors list. Okay, give us your board of directors list. This is usually what you get. And to be honest, other than just as a grant reviewer, other than just quickly counting, okay, they have X number of volunteers. And then sometimes I will look at it and say, okay, it looks based on the name that they have X number of males or men or X number of women, just to kind of see if there's a broad cross section of people. But of course, that doesn't help to identify people that may publicly identify as non-binary or trans. So what I would recommend is something like this. And I just kind of threw this together. Obviously, I am not on the board of the Grant Plan. The Grant Plan is a private corporation that doesn't even have a board, but this is just an example of how you could do it. So you put a picture of your board member next to it, and then you put their name, their title. So if it's, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, or just simply board member or board trustee, whatever your term is. You would put their community affiliation. So things like community leader and former client, executive director of a nonprofit organization, financial director of a government agency, or owner of a local business. These things kind of show the funders that you have a diverse cross-section of people that are sitting at the table helping to lead. And so when we see those things and when we're reviewing applications, it's like, okay, good. So they do have a lot of different perspectives at the helm that are giving direction. Two other things that are often asked for or recommended is, first of all, how long have they been on your board or what your board term limits are? So sometimes it's cool to just put it right on there, board members since 2013. And what is usually not necessarily asked for, but I think is a crucial thing to demonstrate an investment and a commitment from your board members. And I'll tell you as a fundraiser, they should be doing it anyways, is how long they've been a donor. Even if they're donating $5 a year or however much they are, whether or not your organization even has a specific board fundraising campaign, it is important to note, especially if you have very positive statistics, we'll say, as they've been a donor, we've got 100% board donorship, how long they've been donating, then amount is not important. It's that they are invested in your organization. So this is just a quick example of like what the first page might look like of board of directors. And usually when they ask for an attachment of board of directors, there is no page limit. So you could put however many pages you needed to include all of your board members, including a picture, bio, or snapshot. Then at the bottom or somewhere included, you could include one or all of these sort of infographics or visuals. Something like 100% of all of our board members are donors, which is a really impressive thing to say. And it's important to the funder because they see that there's actual buy-in and investment from the people that are at the helm. You could put in there self-identified gender. And, there's an example right here. If we had 10 board members and one identified as non-binary, 3 were men and 6 identified as women, then you could just kind of do that quick pie chart. There's also what we call a tree chart, which is the board of directors self-identified race. I apologize if it's a little hard to see, but on the bottom left, you see that many proportionally are white. In the yellow is Hispanic, in the orange is Black, in the gray is Asian, and in the blue is Native American or Indigenous. And so that just sort of shows the cross-section or mix or proportions of people with the self-identified race. I'm also going to quickly put in here, never guess at somebody's race, never guess at somebody's gender. Please make sure it is self-identified. And so this is something you're going to want to put together before, 3 days before your deadline. Make sure you get that information from your board members as they join. And then I did kind of a fun, interesting one, and I'll show you later on how you can do this. It's the board of directors, self-identified age and race. So the first column under white shows you that the white board members range somewhere around the mid 40s to early 70s in terms of age. The Black board member was somewhere in the late 30s. The Asian was somewhere in their late 20s. The Hispanic was anywhere from looks like the late teens to the early 50s. And then the Native American board member was somewhere in the early 30s. So it kind of shows a diversity of the people that you have on your board. You don't have to include all of these. Some of them, they might not really show very much, so you may think that they're not really relevant. But I want you to start thinking about ways in which you can sort of digest and process the data that you know that the reviewers and the funders will be looking for, and how to highlight things that are important, especially if you're demonstrating that your organization is working towards racial equity. You want to be able to demonstrate that you have a good mix of people that are at the helm of your organization. So now we're going to talk about commonly requested attachments and appendices that have to do with your finances. The first, and you're always going to be asked for this, just about always, is your current fiscal year organizational budget and a program budget if you're applying for programs. You will also necessarily be asked for your most recent financial audit or your fiscal agent's most recent financial audit. Be prepared, you may be asked for up to the last 3 financial audits. Additionally, if you are applying for a federal grant, and if you have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement or a NICRA, you will have to include that as well. Other things that you may be asked for or could be valuable in showing are things like your previous fiscal year organizations and budgets, and that's a way to sort of contrast how your organization has grown. Your most recent and past IRS Form 990 tax filings, although a lot of times if you're asked for your audits, you won't be asked for your 990s. Your current fiscal year financial statement year to date. So we're 3 months into our fiscal year. Here's what we budgeted. Here's how we're doing. Here's how much money we have. If we suddenly stop earning anything in the next, if by tomorrow, if suddenly no more revenue came in, here's how many days or months or years of operating dollars we have. Your most recent completed fiscal year financial statement. Now, this is different than your audit. However, if your most recent audit is also for your most recent fiscal year, you probably won't need to include this. Occasionally, audits will take so long that you don't have your most recently completed fiscal year audits, but you can at least show your most recent fiscal year financial statements. And then if your organization or entity has an endowment, then it's important sometimes to show that you have that, because it's another means of demonstrating that if things go sideways and you need some emergency support, you can access your endowment if your organization allows for such access. You will also frequently be asked for your top 5 donors list. Sometimes this is just for the entire organization if you ask for general operations, or it may be by program, depending on what you're applying for. You might also be asked for your full donor list, although oftentimes this is included in your annual report. So they may not ask for it, or you may just feel like that's overkill. We really don't need to show every single person that donated. Or you may want to show that you have a tremendous support within the community and you have hundreds of donors. And here's our very quick, lots of little columns, but very tiny fonts. But here's all the people in the community that have, from their own pocketbooks, supported our organization. The more an organization can see that support, the more likely they are to feel like, well, a lot of other people are committed and investing. So that makes us feel more confident about us committing and investing in this organization, agency, or entity as well. And then finally, you may be asked for things like, what are your current fiscal year and even your past fiscal year grant awards and commitments, either for general operations or program, and or sometimes they'll ask for all of it, as well as any pending grant applications. Sometimes you will be asked for that, especially if it's a program, not so much necessarily for general operating, but when you're asking for funding in a program, they may say, okay, who do you have committed this year and who are you pending still? So as they sort of calculate how much money could be coming in, they're also assessing, will our dollars make a difference? Will our dollars complete that budget? Or are they so woefully under budget that that's a concern as well? So those are important things and pieces of information that they will sometimes ask for. So this is a very, very rudimentary budget that you might throw together, right? It's really easy. Put that in an Excel sheet. You've got your cells, you make sure everything adds up. I will tell you that as a grant reviewer, one of the first things that I do is make sure that the lines of total income and revenue and total expenses and liabilities at least match, and or the total income and revenue is greater than the total expenses and liabilities. If it is not, and if no explanation is offered, that is a red flag to us as grant reviewers and to funders. This could be an opportunity for you, however, to say, you know what, we are $250,000 short, but we have an organizational endowment that our board has already approved for us to be able to take take it from. However, you're seeing the board approved at the beginning of the year budget. And so that's sort of the postscript to that budget. Other things that you can do, because I can tell you again, as a grant reviewer or a funder, when we're looking at these things, is we're looking for what's the sort of breakdown and how much reliance are there on certain things. So you could include something like this pie chart, which shows that a little over 50% of all of the funds come from foundations, which is, depending on your organization, is kind of a high number, but it's also not the end of the world. And we'll explain that in a second. We can see that 14% come from individual donors, 18% comes from fees for service, and 10% comes from contracts. And then a little bit comes from investment income as well as special events. So just giving those quick visuals, if you think about infographics and visuals, etc., you're much more likely to remember the pie chart than you are to remember the table on the side. You still have to provide the table on the side, but if you want to make it easy and you want to make your attachments sort of stand out and pop and be easily memorable, then visuals is kind of the way to go. Here's another example of a chart that you could put with or next to your budget. This, for example, shows the last 5 years of funding. So clearly, we've had steadily growing foundation support. And yes, there's a small bump you can see in 2022, our budget for 2022, but that's because we got a commitment in 2021 for $250,000 from a funder. So they committed to both 2021 and 2022. So we just increased that much more. You can sort of take the opportunity to use these visuals, but also to explain these visuals, including strengths as well as deficits. Don't ever be afraid to explain. 2020 was a hard year for us. If you look at the 2020, which is yellow, you can see that it is less than for individual donors and it is less than fees for service. This will be no surprise to funders, right? But it's still important to sort of put that data out there so you can also show what we have budgeted for 2022 is really pretty in line with the growth that we have had over the years. All right, objective number 2. You guys know all of the general attachments and appendices that you should consider or maybe asked to include in your grant application. The next is, how do you prepare these attachments for either electronic or online submission or hard copy submission? The bulk of this information is going to be regarding electronic submission or online portal submission, but we will talk just a little bit about hard copy submission since, as I mentioned, it does still happen. So here are the tips. For online submissions, convert every single one of your files to a PDF unless the funder specifically requires or requests that you do it otherwise. This is because depending on which version of Word or Excel or whatever software you are using to create your documents, the person opening them may not have the same version. And so when they do, suddenly page margins will change, formatting will change, font size will shift. Maybe they don't have the font that you used, and so it converts to another font and it looks really funky. It is just a good general rule that unless they tell you otherwise, you convert every document to a PDF. And we will actually go over that in just a second. When prudent, you will combine individual PDFs together to one PDF file. This is for private funders. This is not for the federal government. Most of the time for federal government applications, they are necessarily going to have you upload each one individually. Sometimes each one individually is uploaded into a form attachment. So that's why I said when prudent. You may also find that it just doesn't work well or would be confusing if you put them all together based on however that funder's grant portal is. But for the most part, even if they do say, here's you can upload 10 slots, it's a lot better to make it easy to put everything into one document, number all the pages, and then when permissible, include a table of contents on top or an attachments or an appendices list with page numbers and all that other good stuff for ease of reference and navigation. And if you know how, include hyperlinks in your PDF document so that when the person opens the PDF document, they can literally click on the links in your table of contents and go, you know what, I really want to see their annual report. And they click on the table of contents, boop, and now suddenly they're in your annual report. If you know how to do that, great. We will not be going over hyperlinks today. That's a more complicated thing. So also number all of your pages, whether they are individual PDFs or a group PDF, and put headers on each page if possible to include your organization or entity's name, as well as the name of the program if you're asking for program funding, the document name or type, and any other requested information or header. So for example, I could say the grant plants fund Tanya teaching every single day because she loves to, and this is the budget narrative and 2022, right? So you would put all of the data in the header if possible. I want you to strongly consider your file naming conventions, i.e. what you name the files. And remember that not only does the funder see them in most instances, but sometimes they rely on them to figure out what is where if they need to open something up. I have seen instances in which people put things they don't realize that the funder is going to see. And while it is somewhat entertaining for me to see those names, it's embarrassing for you. So be careful what you name your files. Also, don't have it be a jumble mix of letters and numbers because it's just confusing, and it's so much easier for me as a grant reviewer to go, okay, where is the program budget? Okay, great, it's in the name, Blue program budget. Where is the list of board of directors? Okay, great, it says grant plant board of directors. So make it easy on them with your naming conventions and make sure that it includes your organization's name, not the name of the funding opportunity, unless asked to, because they already know what the funding opportunity is. The more important thing is for them to be able to keep it and keep track of it by the organization, which is you. The next thing is for online submissions, I want you to assume that all of your documents will be printed in black and white. Now, that doesn't mean you can't put charts and graphics and other things in color, but what you do need to do is test out all of your documents and images printed in black and white to make sure that they'll sort of translate well into black and white, because I have certainly had beautiful photographs of clients that I wanted to put in a client success story, and then when I printed it in black and white, just the way that it was treated, the saturation, it was basically all black, and that's really unfortunate. Another tip is to be certain to follow instructions. This is really more so for, I mean, it's for everything, but especially for hard copy submissions. Be sure that you submit the appropriate numbers of copies, because usually the number of copies they ask for is the number of reviewers plus the program officer, plus the program officer, and plus the executive director. However, they are asking for a specific number. And if you don't have them, sometimes they just won't even review your application. Also make sure that everything is in the order if there is a specific order that has been requested by the funder. So how do you save your work as a PDF? Well, in Word, if you are on a PC, it's pretty easy. When you go to Save or Save As, in the red circle, you can see Save As Adobe PDF. Or once you actually get to the Save As screen, you can scroll down under the Save As type, and you can actually click a variety of different formats, including PDF. On a Mac, you also have this option. You can see here at the bottom lower left, when you go to print, you can print as PDF like that. For Excel, you have the same option as you do in Word on a PC, save as Adobe PDF. Again, same thing. Once you get to the Save As screen, you can save as PDF. Or on a Mac, you can also do the Save As, and then at the bottom, instead of Excel's workbook, you can save it as a PDF. You can even save photographs as a PDF. If you right-click on them, you will see all of the options, and then highlighted in white is Convert to Adobe PDF. And then once you're in Adobe PDF, or excuse me, Adobe Acrobat Pro, if you have Adobe Acrobat Pro, if you don't, I'm going to give you some tips. You can combine files into a single PDF, and that's what's circled, or you can even break down a file that has a bunch of different things into multiple PDF files if you want to. Objective number 3, learn tips on how to make attachments and crucial bits of information to stand out. We've already kind of talked about this. Visuals, visuals, visuals. Now I said that 3 times.
not because I want you to jam pack your application with visuals, but because I want you to get to the point where you start thinking, if I could only tell this story in visuals, if I couldn't really use words other than the words that may, for example, go on a flow chart or on a pie chart or something, but really, if I'm thinking about visuals, how would I tell my story? Then you will start producing various visuals. And like I said, you're not going to include all these visuals in every single application, or every attachment is going to have 72 different visuals. You don't want that. That is also going to be overkill, and it's not really going to convey the information. And visuals do take up space. And a lot of times you're limited on the space. You've got page limits. And so you really have to be choosy about the ones that are going to convey the most information and the most memorable and that you think are really important. But the reason I'm saying it 3 times is because it's so vital to get people that are reviewing your application to really think about your application afterwards. I cannot tell you how many times as a grant reviewer it has stuck out for me, and I have thought afterwards, oh yeah, and they had that really great chart, right? They had a bunch of information, and rather than cramming it all in or putting it in a bunch of bullet points, they put a chart or a table, which was really, really easy for me to navigate. So I highly recommend visuals whenever possible. I want you to consider why the funder is asking for the attachment. Now, the truth is, between you and me, sometimes they're not thinking about why they want it. They just ask for it because everybody else does. But most of the time, it is to provide assurances to the funder so that they know that A, you're eligible, B, that you could legally receive the funds, C, that there won't be any problems, D, that you are an appropriate steward of their dollars and they can rely on, if they give you the money, you're going to use the money properly, right? So usually there are reasons. So when you think about the reasons why a funder is asking for a particular attachment, sometimes that will inspire you to include a certain visual or to change up the way in which you present that attachment. I just mentioned this: convert massive chunks of data to tables, graphs, or charts and refer to them in the narrative as appropriate. Whenever possible, ensure that your font and font size, even if it's, the headers are consistently one size, subheaders are consistently at one size, and the main narrative or information is another. Make sure they're consistent across all of your attachments as well as your narrative, if you can. Again, remember, some of those attachments that we talked about didn't have the asterisk next to them, and they're not anything you really can have any control over. They are what they are. But some of them, the ones that you are producing, the ones you are specifically making for this, try to make sure that your attachment fonts are consistent with your narrative fonts. Now, sometimes you will have had these attachments pre-made, and then you go to a funder and they say, well, we want you to make sure you are in Times New Roman and all of your attachments are in Arial. If you have the time to convert from Arial to Times New Roman, and it's not going to mess up your entire formatting for everything, take the time to do it. It really does make a difference. It looks more professional. It's easier on the eyes. And I will tell you, as a grant reviewer, when I've looked at a bunch of different grants in a day, when I look at somebody's grant and they have 6 different fonts throughout all their attachments, it's just visually a headache. Don't do that. Make it easy for your grant reader and the person reviewing your grant. For narrative sections, use obvious subheader sections. Consider things like all caps, bold or italics, or bold and italics. Font colors other than black, I recommend that you go with darker colors because they're easy. Don't go with things like yellow or light green or even orange. The highlight feature is sometimes appropriate to use, but I would use that sparingly. And or the underline or boundary border functions are good to sort of section off things to, again, make visual cues for when you're changing up the narrative or the information you're providing. Do not be afraid of white space. Do not cram every single space if you can avoid it. And I am guilty of this. I get it. You have 100 words to get in as much information. Now, 100 words is sort of an extreme example. Most of the time you're going to use 97 to 100 words, right? But if you have a 10-page maximum, there's usually time and the space that you can provide. If you take a moment and think about what's the crucial data we need to include, and even times where it's appropriate to take out a paragraph or two to include a graphic because it's going to just really convey that much more information and make an impression. For both online and hard copy submissions, strongly consider simplified color palettes. The simplified is always one neutral color and then two other colors that are complementary. Sometimes they're a lighter tone of one color and a darker tone of another, or just nice colors that go together. But also consider color blindness and other accessibility issues. So I highly recommend you don't do things like red and green, because that is the most common color blindness. Things like blue and green are also difficult and is the second most common color blindness. So just try to be mindful of those things. Again, remember, if you're going to print this in black and white, how's it going to look? Don't forget your branding when appropriate. If you can, include your logo, use your organization's colors or your logo colors as font colors. If your organization has a specific font that they like to use and the funder doesn't require a font, then you might consider it if you feel like it's easily readable. Maintain the same look and flow if you can. So remember the infographic that I showed you at the beginning of this presentation about the grant plant? Look at this information and imagine if I had taken this information and just written a couple of paragraphs on it, how likely would you be to remember everything I wrote in the paragraphs versus looking at this infographic, right? So that is the power of visuals and the power of infographics. But sometimes the infographics or visuals are just not appropriate. So you need to make a determination, especially based on the funder or the grant opportunity that you are seeking. Is this something I should do? That's just a close-up of some of the cool graphics. And even the bottom part here where it says 221 projects, we're not even really talking about a super complicated infographic, right? But it is eye-catching, it's visually stimulating, it helps me quickly digest the information. So if you can do those things in an appropriate context in your attachments or even narrative, but we're talking about attachments today, I recommend it. So a couple of resources. There is something called Creately. It's a pretty cool website that allows you to make free flow charts and process charts and organizational charts. You do need to create an account, but it is free. You can also, of course, upgrade as you can with everything on the internet, but this is one where you actually can get a lot for free and not have to actually pay anything. There's also something called Canva, which among many other things allows you to create free infographics, and that is the website right there. That is where I created the infographic of 100% of our board donors, or 100% of our board are donors. That was created today in about 2 minutes on Canva. And word clouds is a word cloud generator. There's going to be a few times where word cloud will probably be appropriate, but it could be something that is included, for example, on your organizational fact sheet, or maybe on a theory of change, right? So as you're creating things, consider that might be appropriate. And of course, don't forget to give credit where it's due. Always remember to avoid plagiarism by citing where you got it from and asking permission when relevant. So before we get to the end where we do questions and answers, I want to take a moment to show you some quick tools. And we've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to go first to Excel. So let me share that. And I'm going to show you guys, if you don't already know, how to create easy charts from Excel information. So share screen. All right. Hopefully you guys can see all that. So what I did is I just said, okay, for example, if I have a 10-person member board and I put all these people in here, right? I've got my board members, I've got what gender they identify in. I put down how much they donated in this year's annual board giving campaign, which in these examples, I didn't do much with that other than to say that they were 100% were donors. I have their race that they identify as, and I have their age, right? So if I have this information and I want to, for example, figure out, okay, how do I create this chart right here with the gender? Well, you do have to convert it to numbers. So I calculated everything up and I've got white 3, black 2, Asian 1, Hispanic 3, and Native American 1. And then, gender, woman 6 or 60%, man 30%, and non-binary 10%. So I take this And then I go to insert. And then I go here where there's recommended charts, but in this case, I know I want to do a pie chart. I will tell you the recommendation is never to do a 3D pie chart, even if they look cool, because it skews the way people look at results. So the recommendation is to do a 2D pie chart. So I click on that and suddenly, bloop, it just created basically the same thing you're seeing here, right? But it looks a little different. When you go under the chart styles, you can then scroll through a variety of options in terms of the way that it will look. You can pick what you think is going to look best for you. In this case, I think I chose this one right here. And then I decided that I wanted to, sorry. So if I click on the 60% and then I right click, I want to change or format the data labels. And in this case, I decided to include the category name. So I know I just went through that quickly, but the good thing is you can watch this video again, and there's also a ton of YouTube videos that'll show you how to do it. So there's a quick example on how you could do a pie chart, right? So let's talk about this chart right here. We've got the race, which again, I had to sort of convert so that I had everything right here. So I take and I highlight these cells that have both the value or the name or category as well as the number. Again, I go to insert. I'm going to go to tree map. I click on that and voila. Same thing, I can press on the little paintbrush and I can change around the way it's going to look. I can even do things like, let me see. Oh, that one's not going to do it. I'll show you in the next chart. But you can play around with it, you know. You can increase the size of things, you can change the colors of the text, etc. So Excel actually, without any extra add-ons or pivot charts or any of that good stuff, you can make reasonable graphs and charts to feature some of the information and also do a little data analysis, which is kind of fun. So now we've got this one. This is a little more complex, right? We have the board of directors, self-identified age with race. So I'm going to go back to this top thing and I'm going to highlight age and race. I again will go to insert. This time I'm going to go to the histograph, which looks like a bar chart, but it's all one color. So that's the bar chart. This is the statistical. I'm going to say box and whisker, and this pops up. Okay, so I would highly recommend, if you've got an hour, go on YouTube, look at various tutorials. There's a lot of cool charts that you can make. There are also a number of free online chart making tools that you don't have to pay for that you can add in graphics. Remember, don't just add graphics to add graphics. If you feel like there's value or you want to show a distribution, or if you think that it will show a trend, those are important reasons to consider including a graphic. Now I want to show you how you can merge a bunch of PDFs from your files. So share screen, go to this folder. So here is my, the attachment, say that I want to submit to this particular funder. I'm going to submit my IRS 501c3, my New Mexico Charitable Organization registration statement, board of directors list, as well as our bylaws and the normal budget. And so that this isn't huge, this is basically each one of these are just the first page of each, right? So I'm going to highlight all 5, right click, combine files in Acrobat. That's one way, or you can actually open up your Acrobat and let it happen. So now I have all 5 files. I can choose to move these by clicking and dragging, right? So let's say I want my 501c3 first, and then I want my bylaws. So we're going to drag those up. Sorry, that's not moving. Well, it's being finicky, so we won't worry about it, but you can do it. You can also change, like the board of directors, I think technically I have 2 pages. So we'll just go ahead and hit combine. Combines all 5, and then now as I scroll down in this PDF, I can see that all 5 individual PDFs have been combined into one, including my random visuals page, right? So we've got that. Okay. And then one other thing, what was I going to show you all? Oh, okay. So I'm going to show you some of those tools that I was just talking about. This is the word cloud generator, which is really pretty cool. You can plug in your word list and then you can choose your shape. So let's say that I am an organization that is doing neurodevelopmental delay research, right? Boom, we've got the brain. Let me, if I can decrease the size. Oh, that's just the number, sorry. We can change the fonts, we can put the directions, etc. So this is cool. It's totally free. You don't have to sign up for an account. That's one of them. This is the Canva. You can start designing an infographic. So you open it up and you say, for example, we'll just do the one I did earlier, which is the donors. I'm going to pick that one, and then I'm going to go ahead and take my text. I'm going to add a heading. No, I want to add some body text. "100%. 100% of board members are donors!" Exclamation mark. I'm going to go ahead and move this up here. Change it so that it is humongous, way too big. Change. It's overlapping his thumb, but we're going to ignore that. You guys get the point. And then basically you just go ahead and download. So I would download the thing. So that's a great way to make free infographics. And then the other thing that I was going to show you, if I can get my, is Creately. So I'm not going to go through this one too much, but you can see there's some really pretty cool things you can do with Creately. Go to the home page. You can create, the reason you have to create an account is because you can create a workspace, but I mean, you've got some pretty cool flow charts and shapes and all that other good stuff that you can do with that. So those are some of the free tools that I just wanted to quickly highlight for you. And then I think we are essentially done with questions and answers. The last 3 tips I want to give you is, first of all, YouTube is your friend. Look up cool how-to videos and learn neat tricks in Words and Excel. Be sure to use the help feature on whatever software you're using, because you will find some really cool things that you can do. And the last thing that I really want to emphasize is don't be too hard on yourself. I just went through a lot of information and lots of weird, cool tricks that took me a little while to learn. So work on getting one infographic. Work on making it so that you feel proud of it and good with it, and you feel comfortable with the tool that you used for it. Learning these are a new thing, and you really need to give yourself some grace in learning these things. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop here. And we've got about 5 minutes at least left in the time period to ask questions, but I'm happy to stay after and answer any other questions if we have a good, vibrant discussion. I'll look at the chat really quick to see, when asked to include budgets, are we required to include revenue? Is that a red flag? I have always just included the expense budget and never even thought about including income. So I would find it odd as a grant writer, or excuse me, grant reviewer. I would find it curious, like, well, why didn't they include it? Is it that they don't have any revenue? Is that they're short and they're just afraid to show me? So red flag might be a strong word, but I would find it very weird if it wasn't included. So I would recommend that from now on, you do include your revenue, and you can include whatever level of detail you want. For example, on the quick budget that I showed you, it was very broad level, like foundations, $1.25 million. You might in your budget break it down by corporate foundations, government grants, private foundations, United Way, right? You can break it down and include as much detail as you want, or you can leave it pretty broad level, but I would at least recommend those categories that you saw on my budget, because those are pretty in line with what you'll see with most grant funders, what they're looking for. Are there any other questions, comments, suggestions, resources that you want to add in, cool tricks that you've learned?
Tanya, I just want to follow up on you answering that question about the revenue budget. Could you explain like how people, especially small nonprofits, how you would and how would you display revenue if most of your revenue is like in-kind donations?
So, okay. So your in-kind donations technically aren't going to pay your light bills, right? So usually in-kind is not worked into the formal budget, with few exceptions. And there was, like I worked for a community mediation center where we had a threadbare staff of like 3 people, 2.5 really, but we had 100 mediators doing the work. And so we would include that. But most of the time you don't include your in-kind donations. I would hope that if you are prepared to receive donations and funds from an organization, you have probably received some funds from somewhere, whether that was a contract, whether that was a special event, whether that was individual contributions. This is more challenging for brand new organizations that are just getting off the ground, but they have to have had some income from somewhere to start paying. Now, maybe you literally are an organization that is exclusively volunteer run, that, you know, you've paid for everything out of your own pocket and you haven't really kind of put that formally into anything. That is unfortunately for most funders going to be something where they say they're maybe not ready to receive a $25,000 grant because they need to demonstrate that they can bring in the money, handle it, manage it, spend it appropriately, report on it, etc. So you most of the time have to show that you have a history of being able to take in revenue from whichever source and then spend it out, and doing it at a point where you're not in the red most of the time. Mariah says, much appreciated. I appreciated both the forums, list discussion, and creative points. I hadn't heard about Creately yet. Yeah, have fun with it. I have a lot of fun with it. I feel like I need to go back and do every single organization and process flow chart that I've ever done in Creately. So, and remember that it's not just things like organizational charts, right? You may have a client intake process, which is incredibly unique, and also is a way to demonstrate the wraparound supports, right? So one person comes in here and then they get all these services, right? Well, how does it happen? Well, from the side, you are working with 5 other organizations that are also providing support. So think about things that are unique about your organization, that are strengths, that are maybe they were a response to a problem that you were seeing, right? You listened to the surveys, you got the information, and then you went, man, we really need to fix this. And so you fixed it and you came up with this very interesting, unique, one-of-a-kind solution. And maybe it wouldn't work for anybody else, but at least it's going to convey to me as the grant reviewer how things work. So once I get in there, how am I suddenly given 17 different referrals? Is that one caseworker really the person that knows everything, or am I having 17 different meetings? Or does the one caseworker have everything in a neat, cool folder and has already worked with the other partners to have information readily available? So there are other things besides just org charts that you can do with that. Process charts, flow charts, maybe your logic model could be done in Creately, your evaluation procedures. There's a lot of things you could do with that. So looking for any other questions, resources, suggestions, feedback. Are you still lost on anything? Give just a couple more seconds for, I know, anybody typing. I want to thank everybody that came today. I know that the topic of attachments doesn't necessarily sound like it's going to be very exciting, but you can make them exciting. You can make them pop. Again, don't go bananas, right? Don't put 16 different graphics on your board of directors list or even your, key staff list, but use them when you feel like you could really highlight some information. And then also don't be afraid to not include them, and also not include a bunch of stuff, not a bunch of text rather. White space is your friend. Jody says, thank you so much. I'm really enjoying the series. I'm very glad to hear that. I will plug once again on YouTube. If you go and search for Pivotal New Mexico, you will see the other 4, and they're really good about getting up the trainings usually within a couple of days. So hopefully this one will be up very soon, and you can go back and look at the lists and, follow me again in Excel in terms of have fun with Excel, by the way. I would highly recommend that you take, for example, your clients, just take like 10 or 20 of your clients and plug in important information that you normally play with, and then kind of play with the charts to see what kind of things they do. The really cool thing with Excel, and we are ending time, so if you need to bounce out, that's fine, but I'm going to take the opportunity right now to show you this. I have the hiccups, excuse me. So the cool thing about Excel is you can take all of the information, and you see that when I highlighted, this little thing right here pops up. This is called quick analysis. And you can do things like data bars, right? So this shows me right here, person A, I, and J, they donated the most in the campaign. The one that donated the least was right here, here, and here, right? So that's one quick thing it might show you. Another thing is color scale, right? So the lighter the color, the older they are. The darker the color, the younger they are. It's not done well in this particular color. But then you can do things like highlight all these, go to insert, and go recommended charts, right? And so it'll look at your data and say, what might be kind of cool is if you showed this, right? I don't know what the various series are, but it'll give you examples. So take honestly, I would say take an afternoon, take 4 hours, play around with it, because you can, I'm sure I have only even touched the tip of the iceberg in Excel in terms of some of the really cool tools and resources and things you can do with it. So with that, Robert, do you have anything else that you want to say and close out?
No, I think we're all right. Keep an eye out for our next email for our next event in the first week of December after the holiday. It's coming up at the end of the month. And a big thank you to Tanya and to everyone for attending today. And just, hope everyone stays safe for the holidays next week. And,
Please, yeah.
And we will see you in early December.
Yep. All right. Bye. Thank you.